change your world. It's time to let it go. The things you used to think, the things you used to know, they don't help you anymore. It's time to change your mind. If it's peace you want to find.
This is Kurt Kaikonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Change Your World, we'll be in the book of Acts. So grab your Bible and let's get started.
It's time to change your world. You need to let it go.
So last week, we had the Jesus Revolution that was breaking out up in Antioch of Syria, where just like how the hippies were being saved in the 70s, where they were like the most unlikely people to be saved, we had the same thing happening among the pagans in Antioch, Gentiles, the very last people anyone ever thought could be saved. But God saved them because God loves people. He loves all people, and he'll save anyone no matter where they are in life, and that's why Jesus came. And after Paul, who's still called Saul here, and Barnabas spent a year up there in Antioch teaching and discipling the new converts, the church became strong, and they became a sending church, replacing Jerusalem as the main church that sent people out. Where in the very last verse of chapter 11, we see that the church in Antioch, they sent Barnabas and Saul to Jerusalem to bring a gift, to give the church in Judea some relief because of the famine that was coming upon the whole world. And so now we begin chapter 12. We start back in Israel, and we hear about Herod, where he has the title of being the king of Israel. And this was a title that was given to him by Claudius Caesar, who he had befriended in his youth. And so this Herod, where there are so many Herods in the Bible, it's really kind of hard to keep them all straight. But this is King Herod Agrippa I. And you have to remember that the Herods, they weren't Jewish, but they were Idumean, which means they were all Edomites. So they're not of Israel, they're not descended from Jacob, but they're descended from Esau, Jacob's evil twin brother. And the Jews, they hated the fact that the Herods, they ruled over them. But the Jews, they also tolerated this Herod more than any of the other Herods that preceded him. And that's because this Herod, his grandmother was descended from the Maccabees. And the Maccabees were popular. The Maccabees were heroes in Israel. And Herod's wife, she was also descended from the Maccabees. And so this Herod, he kept all the Jewish feasts. So he's really trying to play on his Jewishness. But make no mistake here, he is a Herod, and he is an Edomite. And his keeping of the Jewish feast, it was only political. It was just to please the Jews because he was just as evil as any of the Herods. And the truth is, it's because he's a Roman. He was appointed as king by Claudius Caesar himself. His loyalty is with Rome. It's not with Israel. Where this Herod, he is the grandson of Herod the Great. And Herod the Great is the one who ordered all the deaths of all the baby boys in Bethlehem at the birth of Jesus Christ, where he tried to kill the Messiah, which is the same Herod the Great who was the great builder, the one who had built Herod's temple, the fortress at Masada down by the Dead Sea, and he also built the Antonia fortress. And he had all these great buildings that he had built around Israel. But this King Herod Agrippa I, he is also the nephew of Herod Antipas. Now, Herod Antipas, that's the Herod that Jesus stood before when Jesus was sent to him by Pilate. So this is the same Herod Antipas, who had John the Baptist beheaded for saying that it was unlawful for Herod Antipas to take his brother Philip's wife as his wife. Where that woman that Herod Antipas took, she was also his niece, where her name just happened to be Herodias, because she's descended from the same Herod the Great. Where this Herodias, she's the woman who demanded her husband, Herod Antipas, to kill John the Baptist. And here, she just happens to be King Herod Agrippa's sister. So this whole Herod family, they all belong on the Jerry Springer Show, and not one of them was any good. And this family of the Herods, these are the last known Edomites ever recorded in history. And so now you have King Herod, and he's harassing the church, and he kills the apostle James, one of the sons of thunder, the apostle John's brother, who was one of the three from Jesus's inner circle. And that inner circle included Peter, James, and John. So this James, the one that Herod killed here, is one of those three. He's one of the three that Jesus brought with him to see his glory on the Mount of Transfiguration. He is also one of the only three that Jesus brought into the room when Jesus brought Jairus' daughter back to life, raising her from the dead, where everybody else, they were all kicked out. And so with this death of the apostle James, it breaks the illusion that somehow the apostles had some special type of protection from God where they couldn't be harmed. And here where it mentions that this James is the brother of John, this is the last mention of the apostle John in the book of Acts. And it says here that he killed James, the brother of John, with a sword. And that doesn't mean that he went and he stabbed him with a sword. It means that James was beheaded. And James here, he is the first apostle to be murdered, but he's not the first martyr. If you remember, Stephen was the first martyr, but James here is the first apostle to be martyred. And eventually, all the apostles will be murdered, all except for the apostle John, who's James's brother, where he's the only apostle, the apostle John, who will die a natural death. And what you need to notice here is that James here, he's not replaced by someone else to become an apostle, to be able to keep the number of apostles 12. Because if you remember, that's what they did with Judas after Judas's death. And the reason for this is believed because the church is now opened to the Gentiles. So that time of the 12 apostles being the 12 witnesses to the 12 tribes of Israel, well, that's over. And so there's no reason or no need for another person to take James's office. So now with Herod taking the life of James, the Jews, they loved it. All the Jews that hated Jesus and all the Jews that hated Jesus' disciples. And this made King Herod very popular with the Jews. And so now with him riding on this new wave of popularity, Herod, he plans on killing more apostles. And so he arrests Peter, Jesus' number one apostle. And so he plans to kill Peter in the same way that he killed James, because he's still trying to please the Jews. And so this persecution that's brought on by Herod, this is a lot different than the persecution that was brought on by Saul of Tarsus. Because with Saul, he actually believed what he was doing was right. But Herod here, all he believes in is himself. And his motives are all purely political, where he would use any means to be able to get himself ahead. And so now here by Herod waiting until after the Passover, he's trying to show himself as being an observant Jew, as one who observes the Passover. And so Peter, arrested here, this is all about the time of Passover. So this is thought to be 44 AD. So it's now been 11 years since Jesus was crucified. And this now is the third time that Peter's been arrested and put in prison. And this time, Peter, he's waiting for certain death. And it says that Herod's planning on taking Peter out and killing him in front of the people after the Passover feast. Because for the Jews, it was unlawful for anyone to be executed during the feast holidays. But it's not unlawful for a Roman. But here, Herod, he's pretending to be a good Jew. So Peter here, he's going to be in prison for about 8 days. Because this feast, it begins with the Passover, which is the first day of the feast, but then it's followed by the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which lasts for 7 more days. And another reason why Herod may have wanted to wait till after the Passover is that he may have feared a riot, because during this time, the streets were primarily made up of pilgrims who are coming for the feast. And Jesus, he may have had more support from the other people. But it tells us how seriously they took Peter's imprisonment, because they have 4 guards watching Peter at every moment. And for a normal prisoner, they would have just been handcuffed to 1 guard. But Peter, he was chained between 2 guards inside of his cell. And then he has another 2 guards stationed outside his cell watching the doors. And so Peter, he has a total of 16 guards, 4 sets of 4, doing either 3 to 6 hour shifts, because they're treating Peter here like he's a notorious prisoner. Because you have to realize Peter is a flight risk, because he's already escaped from prison once when that angel released him, and he showed up the very next day preaching in the temple. And you just really never know, because in a real tight situation, Peter, he just might get crazy and he might go cut off somebody's ear. So they're not taking any chances with Peter. But it's really hard for me to imagine being Peter. But there is one thing that Peter, he has going for him. And that's that he knows Jesus very, very well. He knows him very, very well personally. And he knows that Jesus is God and that he can deliver him if he chooses to. Because Peter knows that Jesus is faithful, and even in this, and even when he's all alone. But for me, I would have had a hard time wrapping my head around all this, because James was just killed. And you have to realize that Peter, that he's known James, John's brother, longer than he's even known Jesus, because they were all fishing partners. And Jesus, he didn't keep James from being killed. And it's just like how that Jesus didn't keep John the Baptist from being killed. So it's real possible here that Peter thinks that this is it, except for the fact that we see him sleeping, and he's even in a real deep sleep here. And he's even sleeping here between the 2 guards that he's chained to. And you have to look here, and it's like he has made himself very comfortable so that he can get a good sleep. Because what we read here is that he's taken off all his garments and he's taken off his shoes. So he got himself all ready for bed. Like he doesn't have a care in the world. And while this is all going on, and he knows that in the morning, Herod is going to bring him out and he's going to have him executed and cut off his head, just like he did to James. But there's a reason that Peter may be sleeping so well here. Because it may be that Peter, he remembers this conversation that he had with Jesus that we have recorded in the Gospel of John, at the end of John in chapter 21:18, where at the end of their conversation, right after Jesus restored Peter from his denial, and after Jesus asked Peter to feed his sheep, Jesus told Peter that Peter was going to die as an old man. And Peter, he's not old yet. And Jesus also told him that he would die by crucifixion. And Herod here, he's planning on cutting off Peter's head. So Peter, he might not think this is it. But either way, death or life, it wasn't going to let him keep him up all night, because we all know that Peter, he really loves a good sleep. Because he was sleeping on the mountain during Jesus' transfiguration, and then he was asleep again when he was told to stay awake in the Garden of Gethsemane. But whatever's going to happen here, Peter, he trusts Jesus no matter how it's going to turn out. And it's really possible that he's really resolved and wants to go to be with Christ, where he misses Jesus, or he may even be envying James here. So this is all going on in the prison. But now back here at Mary's house, they're holding this all-night prayer meeting where they're praying for Peter's release. And it says that they've been doing this the whole time Peter's been in prison. So they've been doing this for the whole 8 days. And that Greek word used here for constant prayer in verse 5, it literally means stretching. It means like stretching as far as you can to be able to reach something. And it's the same word that's used for stretching a muscle to its limits. And it's the same word that was used for Jesus' prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. So this is earnest prayer. Their hearts are very engaged in the prayer. So they're praying passionately because they really care about what's going to happen to Peter. And so this prayer meeting, it's probably been going on 24/7 with people coming in and going out. And now it's been going on for 8 days. But now the feast is ending, where this is the very last day of the feast. In fact, this is the very last hours of the feast, because this is all happening in the last watch of the night. So this is all going on between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. And so with the end of the feast, Peter's fate, imminent death, is approaching him, because Herod's about to bring him out and to try him this very morning. And Peter, sleeping so well that the shining of the angel coming in, it doesn't wake him at all. And so the angel, he hits him on the side. And then the angel, it says he still has to raise him up. And so I kind of picture this like a little boy having to be woken up by his mom to get ready for school. That he's being lifted out of bed. He's still in his jammies with mom saying, you need to get going. You're going to be late. And here this angel is telling Peter to get dressed, which means he had to be undressed, where the chains, they just fell off. They didn't have to be unlocked. And we have no idea what's going on with the guards here. We don't know if they're asleep and why they're not waking up. But the angel, he's telling them to do this all quickly, to gird yourself, tie up your sandals. And girding yourself, all that means is to take your undergarments and to get them between your legs and to tie them up like a pair of shorts, which makes it easier to run. And then he tells him to put his coat on, which is his outer garment, and then to follow him. And Peter, he's doing all this, but he's not fully awake. He's just going through the motion where Peter, he really doesn't know that he's really doing this stuff. He thinks this is all just part of his dream. Or to Peter, this seems like a vision. And Peter, he's had visions before. And then they get past those 2 guards, and then they get to the iron gate that leads to the city, and it opens all by itself, just like in the Addams family, where it's creepy and it's spooky, mysterious and kooky. And the word for opened to them of its own accord is this word automata, which is like our word automatic. It's like the doors at Kroger's, the kind that open up on their own, where I would think we should get some of those kind of doors here at our church. But then when they get down this one street, this angel, he disappears from them. And I really like what one guy said here. He said, what? No hug? Yeah, no hug, no nothing. With the angels, it's all just business with them. And then it seems like Peter, he finally just wakes up and he comes to his senses after the angel leaves. Where now Peter realizes he's been delivered by an angel. And so now he's standing in the street. He's all alone. He's probably a little cold because it is after 3 a.m. and it's the end of March or beginning of April, because it's Easter time, where a lot of times we still have snow. And then here Peter says, I know for certain that the Lord has sent his angel and has delivered me from the hand of Herod and from all the expectations of all the Jewish people. And when I read that, I think this is really sad, because Peter, he knows that he's hated by most of the people, and they're all his own people, the Jewish people. And he loves them, and he loves them so much, which was the same way that it was for Jesus. And Jesus knew it. And for us, we have to understand that that really is the way that most people feel about us, where they may not show it, but that's even true here in the United States. But they do. They hate us. They hate what we believe. It's because they hate Jesus. And this really sticks out to you when you read your Bible. And it really doesn't even matter what part of the Bible you're reading. Where right now I'm reading in Isaiah in my quiet times, and it's written all over there. But this is also written in all the books of the prophets, where it's written in all the prophecies of Jesus' coming. It's written about his first coming, and it's written about his second coming, and it's written in all the Gospels, just like it is here, where we realize that Jesus, he's always been hated, and I don't get it. and I don't want to get it, and I don't want to be one of them, and I don't even want to be sympathetic to any of their thinking. Because as people, I really don't know what's wrong with us. And here, some people, they don't think this is fair, but that we see that Peter here, that he has been spared, but James, he was murdered. And it would be really easy to think, well, couldn't God have delivered James? Or why did James have to die? Where it was such an untimely death. And these are the same kind of questions we have when someone we love dies, where it doesn't seem fair to us that they died way too soon. And the difference here between Peter and James, it isn't God's love for them or God's ability to protect them. It's just that it wasn't Peter's time to die yet, but it was for James. That God, he is always aware, and God, he is always in control. Nothing goes unnoticed with God. Or even some of us, we may criticize God when we lose our faith in God or our faith in God's goodness because we lose someone who's close to us. And then we get mad at God because of a tragedy, and we think that it's not fair. But you can't do that because it's not about God being fair. It's about God being sovereign, where he knows things that we don't. And we need to trust him, and we need to know that he's good, though we can't understand why some things happen. But God, he loses none of his. And it's just like how Jesus prayed in John 17, where he said, "Those whom you gave me, I have kept, and none of them is lost except for the son of perdition." And the only reason that the son of perdition, who is Judas, was lost, where Jesus, he didn't lose him either, is just that Judas wasn't given to him. And that's what it says there if you read that prayer really carefully. But James was, and Peter was, and I would say that most of us here are, and that Jesus, he won't lose us either, no matter what happens to us here in our lives. Because God, he loses none of his. And it's his mercy to not keep us here in this wicked world any longer than he has to. Not 1 minute longer after our work is complete. And these aren't just church words trying to justify God. God, he doesn't need anybody to defend him. These are words of truth. We need to let these kind of words penetrate our hearts because these are the things that the Bible says. And so we need to stop looking at this world as if this world is our end, because this world is only our beginning for us believers. All right, so now Peter, he's awake, and he's standing in the middle of the street, and it's cold, and he's on the run, and he's a fugitive. And Herod's going to want him back, and Herod's going to be hunting him down. And so Peter, he goes to Mary's house, where Rhoda answers the door. And what this sounds like to me, this sounds like the Mary Tyler Moore Show, because you have Mary's house with the neighbor Rhoda, and where that Rhoda show, that was just a spin-off of the Mary Tyler Moore Show, and that's the only Rhoda I've ever heard of. And so I kind of see her as this kind of young hippie type friend of this middle-aged woman named Mary. And Rhoda, all that means is rose.
You need to change your world. You need to let it go. Oh.
Thanks for listening to Change Your World. Change Your World is an outreach of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, and your neighborhood church. If you're listening to Change Your World in the Detroit metro area, why don't you join us for church this Sunday? Our service time is 10 a.m. at Calvary Chapel, Waterford, 183 South Winding Drive, Waterford, Michigan. We're competing with the Catholics. It's only an hour. All the donuts you can eat, and you don't have to believe a thing we say, but it could change your world.
You need to change your world.
The rest of today's message can be heard at yourneighborhoodchurch.org. So check us out and download the app. And until next week, remember,